Okay, well, I think we're good to get started. Just want to say welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Thrilled to have you here. Before we get started, I wanted to offer a quick land acknowledgement. I recognize that because we're gathering online, the majority of us are in St. John's, Mount Pearl, surrounding areas, but I still think it's important that we do this. So I wanted to acknowledge that the lands that we are currently residing on are the ancestral lands of the Beothuk, and that Newfoundland is the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the Mi'kmaq. At this time, I'd also like to recognize that the ancestral homelands of Labrador belong to the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatjiavut, and the Innu of Nitassinan. And as we strive for right relations and truth and reconciliation, I'd like you to reflect on the lands that we're residing on and how we can best share these. Okay, so to introduce myself, I'm Jennifer Snow. I'm the Youth Programs Coordinator with YWCA St. John's. I joined a few months ago and have been part of this project in the development of the past 3 months, which has been awesome. So if you aren't aware, which you should be, this is a partnership between YWCA St. John's and the City of Mount Pearl. This event has been underway for the past year. We've been planning. It was actually originally supposed to be held as a full-day symposium in person, but as we know right now, things had to shift. So we're thrilled to be able to host this online, and I'm very happy to have you all here today. So thanks so much for joining us. And before we begin, I just want to give a brief statement about, or a brief note about privacy. So we encourage you all to check Zoom's privacy regulations. You can check that at https://zoom.us/privacy. Please note that this session will be recorded, but that your camera and your audio will be turned off unless user enabled. If you have any privacy concerns about how your information will be disseminated, disclosed, or collected, you can contact Darren Wall at darrenwall@mountpearl.ca. dwall@mountpearl.ca, apologies. I'd like to take this time now to invite Isabel Fry to give some greetings on behalf of the City of Mount Pearl.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for this exciting virtual event. I am proud to be here on behalf of the City of Mount Pearl. And Mount Pearl is an open, progressive, and family-friendly city, and a recognized leader in effective governance and innovation. However, the city has historically lacked diverse candidates for municipal elections. Now, as an inclusive city, we ask ourselves, why aren't more individuals with different backgrounds stepping forward to serve local and regional politics? And this led us to a partnership with the YWCA and our Diversity Matters webinar series. Our goal is to combat the factors that deter marginalized voices from running for politics. And leadership groups with a diverse range of backgrounds, perceptions, and life experiences help to make better informed decisions. Hearing different voices and adopting new approaches leads to programs and policies that are better designed for the people they serve. There are so many people that can have a meaningful impact on our community and region. However, they hesitate to become involved. So our hope is that by offering sessions like this one tonight and the one next week, we can encourage more people to become involved. We hope you leave tonight feeling inspired to do so. Thank you to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities for contributing to this series through the Toward Parity Grant Program. Thank you to the YWCA for your partnership in developing and promoting this series. And thank you, Amanda, for your time presenting tonight on the topic of why diversity matters in politics. I am certain you will enlighten and motivate us all. And thank you to everyone for attending, and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you so much, Isabel. I would also like to invite Wendelin from YWCA St. John. She's our Executive Director, and she's going to share a message from YWCA.
There we are. Hi, folks. You'd think we'd be used to doing Zoom by now. I am on it most of the day, but still tonight had a little glitch with getting visible. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Jennifer said, this was initially going to be an in-person full-day event, and COVID-19 had other plans for our year, and we regrouped, and today we have over 70 people registered and engaged in our session online tonight. So we're thrilled as YWCA to be co-hosting this event with the City of Mount Pearl. Just a few words about YWCA. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we have been in St. John's for 95 years in the community here. We were founded in 1925, and so we have a long history in the province and a long history as a women-serving agency. Today, we are still focused on gender equity, and we continue to work to include gender diverse and 2S LGBTQIA+ folks in our work for gender equity. We work with an intersectional lens, which means that we consider how identities such as race, language, culture, and also experiences of poverty or geography or immigration and many other intersections can impact inequity as well. As you may sometimes notice, we're sometimes also confused with the YMCA, and for good reason, because for many years in this community, we operated jointly as a YWCA. But I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we are now a standalone organization. We exist as YWCA St. John's, and we have small offices in downtown St. John's on Harvey Road. YWCA is part of a national and a global movement, and we are part of YWCA Canada, which is the country's largest and oldest women's organization. YWCA Canada includes 32 member organizations and operate in more than 400 districts and communities across the country. We meet together multiple times a year and set priorities. We establish our advocacy directions and review standards and keep one another accountable as charitable organizations in this country. We also work on national advocacy campaigns, and in doing so, we combine grassroots action at a local level with national impact, and our collective work across this country can truly impact the policy decisions on gender equity. In the recent past, we've worked on issues including childcare, housing, sexual assault training for judges, gender-based violence, just to name a few. If you don't know much about what we do in your local community here, I'd invite you to visit our website and learn more about our newcomer services, about our childcare development, as well as our brand new youth employment program for young women and gender diverse folks. So for all of these reasons, we are thrilled to be partnering with the City of Mount Pearl and welcome you very warmly tonight to this online session as we engage with one another to talk about diversity and why it matters. Thanks to the folks at Mount Pearl who have worked tirelessly with us over the past year. And Amanda, we're really looking forward to what you have to share with us today. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Wendelin. I want to take this time now to introduce Amanda, who is our lovely speaker. I did an interview earlier this week where I called her a rock star in the feminist community, and honestly, that stands true for me. Amanda is a professor in the Department of Political Science. She's also the director of the Gender and Politics Laboratory. She is also the co-host of the Academic and Activist podcast, and has published many papers on feminism, on voting, on gendered impacts of voting, on how political party representatives influence voters to come to the polls, and has a lot of really unique insights to offer on this subject. So I'm thrilled to introduce her, and I'm very excited to hear her talk. So Amanda, whenever you're ready, you can take it away.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Jennifer. So I think that all of you folks can now see why it is that Jennifer is getting a fruit basket at Christmas time from me. It's not every day that I get the rock star label. It's very exciting. I'm gonna see if I can share my screen here. I thought I could. Let's see. There we go. Okay. You think, just like Gwendolyn said, that after this many times, I'd have it right too. Okay, so this talk today is a talk that I was asked to do a while ago, and because of COVID, it got delayed. And so here we are today doing it digitally instead of in person. I find the digital version to be somewhat challenging. One of the things that I like to do is read the room. I can't tell if you guys are laughing at my jokes under this format, so I'm going to assume that I'm hilarious and hope for the best. So I'm a prof at Memorial. I teach politics, do some work in gender and politics, do some work in elections and voting and things like that. A lot of the work that I do is based on work related to what's called the gender gap. So when we talk about the gender gap, we talk about the gender gap in participation, and we also talk about the gender gap in attitudes. So I'm going to focus today's talk on the participation piece, but I'm super happy to talk about attitudes too later on if you guys like. That's one of the things that I really enjoy speaking about. So I want to talk about the kinds of gaps that we see in political participation between women and men. And in particular, I want to, sorry, I'm just trying to get my Zoom to work here. It's not quite right. There we go. Okay, so what I want to talk about is gaps in participation between women and men. Whether or not these gaps matter. And then I also want to talk about whether or not we can talk only about sex, or whether we should be thinking more widely when we think about diversity. So for me, it's a spoiler for you. I think you can probably guess what I think about this, but it does matter. So it's not enough to only talk about sex. Sex is very important, and we should notice whether or not women are in politics or men are in politics. But at the same time, we've got to think about more than just sex. We've got to think about diversity of other types as well. So let's talk a little bit about how it is that women and other underrepresented groups can change their status. So thinking about underrepresented groups who tend to be of lower socioeconomic status, they're underemployed, they're unemployed, they are usually of lower education levels, they may not have as many opportunities to have their voice heard. And so when we think about the ways that we can increase the status of these individuals, what we're talking about here really is we're talking about voting. So on election day, you can say what you think and you can have your voice heard. You can participate in politics in other ways, whether it's running for office or volunteering for a party or things like that. We can get more education, which usually leads to different kinds of ideas and different kinds of amounts of power that we can then engage the system with. Linked to that is job prospects, which can link then to changing our socioeconomic status, and then hopefully changing government policies. So not everybody is involved, obviously, in changing government policies, but that is one way that we can increase our status as citizens. So when I'm talking about political participation, what I'm talking about here is participation in politics. So this includes running for office, this includes the extent to which we are interested in politics. Do we pay attention to politics? Do we read the news? It includes things like giving money to campaigns, volunteering, working phone banks for political parties or candidates, writing letters to representatives, and so on. There's lots of different kinds of examples of political participation. It is the case that women participate less than men in most areas of participation, except for voting. So I'm going to show you some data from the US. The US election is top of mind right now for all of us. So you can see here that over time, it used to be the case, looking at the gray line up here, so these gray diamonds, this is men. It used to be the case that men voted more than women. Women are down here. So 71.9% of men voted in 1964, 67% of women. This has changed over time, okay? So right around here, the 1980s, and we talk about the 1980s as being like the year of the woman, and we'll talk a bit more about that, or we can talk a bit more about that after, but something happened then. And so as we kind of move forward in time, what you end up seeing is a bit of a flip, that women are voting and turning out to vote in larger numbers now than men. So that's one area in which women are not lagging behind men in terms of participation. I want to talk briefly too about campaign donations. So this is a graph that a colleague of mine sent me a few years ago when she was doing a lecture on gender and politics and campaign contributions. And so it looks tricky at first, so don't like have just stay calm, take a deep breath. So what this does here is compares on the left-hand side here, the folks who donated to the Obama campaign versus on the right-hand side here, the folks who donated to the Romney campaign, okay? So what you can see here, so the total amount of funds that females contributed, and they use this language of females and males, you'll see in my next slide, I'm going to compare it to today. And I'm changing this to women and men. I think that the female male is problematic, and we can talk about why that is too. So thinking about what women have done here, so the percent of total funds that went to Obama, 44% of that came from women, 56% came from men. Compared to Romney, 28% of funds that were raised by him came from women, 72% of funds were raised by men. So you can see here there's a larger, we call it a gender gap, even though it's more of a sex gap really. We can talk about that later too if you like. A larger gap between contributors for the Republican Party than there are for contributors for the Democratic Party. And you can see here, looking at the number of individual contributions at different dollar amounts. So this one here is the lowest dollar amount of $200. There are lots more people that donated in this category, and the gap between women and men is much smaller. You'll see over here in contrast for the Romney donations, the gap between women and men is actually still quite large, even at this lowest donation cycle. So there is a gap between who donates to whom, and there's a gap between sort of both party and along the lines of sex. Fast forwarding to 2020, there's still a gap. So this is on the left-hand side here, donations to the Biden campaign. On the right-hand side, donations to the Trump campaign just for this year, or this election cycle. So what you can see here, there is still a gap. So men, 51.8%, so almost 52% of all the funds that were donated to Biden's campaign came from men versus 48% of women. And the bigger contrast over here, donations to Trump, 37.6% came from women, 62.4% came from men. And you can see again here the gaps. So looking at the largest donations, the fewest number of people donate that amount to each of these two campaigns. And you can see that the gap is quite wide here in the lowest category. So this is, you know, $200 being donated to these candidates, and there's a large gap between women and men. Okay, so I don't have these same financial and contribution data broken down by race or ethnicity or class or sexuality or employment status or any other category right now, but I think that you can probably guess there are likely to be quite large gaps across all those groups too, and in some cases probably larger gaps. And there's reasons for us to believe this is true. I want to take a look at the participation rates. So going back to women for a second, it is the case that not all women are the same, right? And so if we think about looking at the ways that women participate in politics, and again, these are American data, we can compare different groups of women across these different kinds of activities. So on the left-hand column here, you have different kinds of activities, traditional ones, so going to a rally, working for a candidate, contributing money, we just looked at money, contacting government officials, versus non-traditional activities, including petitions, boycotts, or marches, and then you look at turnout in the 2000 election. So what we're comparing here is these different kinds of activities in the one column against, so we're comparing different groups of women. So in this case, white women, Black women, Latino women, and Asian American women. And so one of the questions that you might ask here is, what are we talking about when we talk about Asian American? She does not break, so this is research by Nadia Brown, she doesn't break it down by what exactly Asian means. So it's everybody from Asia, which is a questionable category, but it's definitely a start. This kind of research is not super common. It's increasingly common, which is great because it's shedding additional light on how people participate in politics. And so what you can kind of see here is that, so what I've circled with my really bad computer writing, what I've circled is the highest rates of participation across these groups for each category. So people that are attending a political rally, they're most likely to be Asian American women, okay? Working for a candidate, Black women top that list. I mean, it's not a big gap between Black women and white women, but it's still, they top that list. Contributing money, white women. So that big gap that I just showed you a minute ago amongst contributors to the two campaigns in the United States right now, you can well imagine that most of those contributions came from white women and not women of other demographic groups. And Asian American women likely to, likely to contact government officials too. So what is interesting about these data is that you can see the differences across these groups, despite the fact that these categories of women are problematic and not perfect. It does give us a better sense of the fact that there are substantial variations across groups of people, and that women aren't just this like, you know, big natural voting bloc. We differ in our behaviors. What you can also see, really importantly here, is Latina women do not do anything the most. This is a highly disenfranchised group, and we can talk a bit more about that as well if you like. So this is an American context. I want you to think about for a second why these racialized and gendered patterns of participation might exist in the first place. So just think about that. We'll talk about it in a bit. But in the meantime, I want to go back to the Canadian context for a second and look at what's happening in Canada in terms of who's running for politics, who's winning in politics, and so on. So this graph here tracks women in Canadian politics. This is at the national level. So this is to the House of Commons. Over time, from 1921, when women first competed in the election, to the present day. So what you can see here is that the percentage of women as candidates has increased over time. Okay, so here we are, right? Just a little bit above 30% right now. So there has been some change, certainly. And what's interesting too is women as a percentage of all MPs has tracked alongside of that. So when women run, they tend to win. And so the biggest barrier to more women in politics is not actually anything more than parties running candidates in winnable ridings. So when they run, they have a good chance of winning. Question you might ask yourself, what about racial minority MPs? This is an excellent question. Thank you. I appreciate that question. See, my jokes are really bad. In 2019, the most recent election, we had 15% of all Canadian MPs were from visible minority groups, which was up from the previous election by 1%, it was 14 in 2015. The important thing to think about here, so we know, for example, that women make up 50% of the population in Canada. And so this number of, 35% or whatever it is right now is not that high compared to where they are in the actual population. Similarly, visible minority groups make up 22% of Canada's general population, and so this number of 15% is really, we're lagging behind where we should be if we think about the idea that people ought to be present in political institutions in roughly equal numbers to where they are in kind of real life. So let's look at the provincial and territorial levels right now. What you can see here is across the board, there are strong differences from place to place. So Quebec has the largest number of women in politics. The Northwest Territories have the least. In addition to this, you can see the average for this data here is a little bit old. This is from the last election. So we're now above 30%. City councilors, we're down here. So about 26% across the entire country in terms of city councilors, and only 16% of mayors are women across the country. What about racial or ethnic diversity? Again, super good question. Honestly, I have no idea. I can't tell you what the numbers are for this, but I would invite you to reflect for just a moment on the fact that there are 40 members in the Newfoundland and Labrador House of Assembly. It's not diverse, right? These people are not from a wide set of different backgrounds. So we're looking at a very white institution at that level, and it doesn't really get better if we go dig down lower. So let's look for a second here at the municipal level of politics. This talk was sponsored by the YWCA and the city of Mount Pearl. So presumably the city of Mount Pearl wants me to talk about the cities. So if we look at Newfoundland and Labrador as a province, and a lot of the folks that I think are logged in and watching this right now live in the province, therefore know a little bit about the province. Still, you can see here as of 2016, the population was almost 520,000. There are 277 municipalities. 77% of those municipalities have fewer than 1,000 residents. So these are very small communities scattered across the province, and you can see them here in this map, right? So they're scattered across, not a lot in the center, a lot around the edges. We know that about Newfoundland already anyway, right? In terms of who runs for politics at the municipal level across the province, these are data that were gathered by students in the Gender and Politics Lab a couple of years ago. What they found was that women's representation has not really increased too much over time. I think we all have this idea that, ooh, as times change, things get better, women are present in greater numbers. It's not really true. So what you can see here is comparing in these three different sets of columns, comparing 2009, 2013 to 2017. In all of those cases, there were far fewer women running for politics than there were men. Okay, so there's not really a big change that's happening. It looks like it's a bit static, at least it is over the last 10 years or so. Looking across different age groups, what you can see here is that men still tend to dominate across the board, in particular in the youngest group and in the oldest group. There's larger gaps. Up here again, see the same thing. In the 26 to 45 age category, there's a little bit more parity, but men still outnumber women in these age categories as well. Looking at roles on council, this is an important one as well. I mentioned that 16% of Canada's mayors are women. And you can see that number bear out in the case of our province as well. So looking at the number of mayors, there's way more men than women. Same thing with city councillors, way more men than women. Ward councillors, way more men than women. Where we see a difference is deputy mayors. So there are more women deputy mayors in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador than there are men deputy mayors. I don't know why that is. We can certainly talk about that. I have some theories. But yeah, so there is a big difference here. We're still seeing that sex plays a role and that there are fewer women than men in city council. I think that I would also invite you to reflect. So these data look at women. I would invite you to reflect not only on the fact that there's a shortage of women in these different political positions, but also there are not very many people who are not white. I don't have the exact numbers for our province, but I'm willing to make a bet that it's quite low. So we can talk a bit about that and why that is later on as well. So let's talk about why it is that there are so few women and why there are so many white people. There are some theories out there and a bunch of different explanations for why this is, and they kind of fall into four main categories or four main sets of explanations. The first one is this idea that the system itself puts up barriers. So the electoral system, the rules that govern how it is that we run elections, the way that party nomination processes work, for any of the folks who are logged in and watching this right now who work for a political party or have run in the past for a party, you know what I'm talking about. Those nomination procedures have a really big effect on whether or not candidates win. And then there's incumbency effects. So usually name recognition matters quite a lot. If somebody is in office, there's a good chance they're going to win again. That person who's already in office is often a man, therefore a man will win again. So those are some systemic effects that people point to. In addition to that, so beyond just the political system, thinking more about resources. And defining resources broadly. So thinking about money, how much access to money do candidates have or potential candidates have? Also time, ability, training, experience. These are all important factors that are heavily based and heavily defined by the next point, which is socioeconomic status. So depending on who you are, where you're from, you may have access to money, time, training, resources, experience in a way that others don't. And then finally, we have this category of culture, in which media, gender roles, and lack of role models play an impact and have an impact on, our perceptions of what's normal, who ought to be in politics. I've spoken to a lot of women politicians over time who all tell stories about, door knocking and having somebody say, sure, I can't vote for you. You're a woman. Shouldn't you be in the kitchen? Stuff like that. So these kinds of comments that are made, those seem extreme, and yet they kind of undergird our whole society. And so they certainly have an impact on the way that things operate in kind of real time. I think it's important too that we remember though that not all women are the same, which means that differences within women are going to result in these explanations being more or less effective for different groups. So for example, political resources, white women who are fairly privileged, who are in the top 1% of income, for example, do not have problems with social networks, with fundraising and things like that. So that's a very different kind of issue compared to somebody, for example, who might be working class, who working in the service industry, different kind of job experience, different kinds of expertise, therefore, in terms of, are you good at managing a campaign, fundraising, managing budgets, things like that. So these are different kinds of skill sets and different kinds of experiences that take place, partly due to socioeconomic status. And I think it's important to reiterate the fact that there is no world in which women of color have an easier time in politics than men or white women. So thinking about these different things, yes, there are barriers. Running for politics is hard. It's a hard job, even for the whitest and oldest white man, but it's hard for everybody. And there are gradations of hardness depending on who you are and where you're from. So I wanted sort of to put a kind of an emphasis point on that point right there. The thing to remember too, though, it's really important, is that all of these barriers, these challenges that I just mentioned, these are all things that prevent folks from running. It's not actually what, prevents them from being electable. So electability and candidacy are two very separate things. And all the data show that the biggest factor that influences whether or not you or I or somebody else elects or votes for a woman or a person of color is just having the choice. So if parties run candidates, they run women, if they run racialized candidates in a winnable riding, voters will vote for them. So there's not actually an issue in that sense. All the data show that when women run, they actually win. And you saw that graph that I showed you where the percentage of women in the House of Commons tracks very closely upon the percentage of women who run as candidates. It's because voters aren't really, despite the stories you might hear at the door, voters aren't really anti-woman or anti-person of color. The problem is that the institutions set things up in a way that makes it seem that way, and parties don't take a big enough responsibility to actually make any change. All right, so let's talk about the so what question. So the title of this talk was, does diversity matter? So I suppose I should talk a bit about that as well. So does it matter if women are in politics? Does it matter if members of other traditionally underrepresented groups are in politics? Again, with the spoiler alert, I use the same jokes over and over again. My students can tell you that. Of course it matters. It absolutely matters who's in politics, and for a number of different reasons. So these are kind of nerdy, very almost philosophical terms that get thrown about this topic all the time. So we could talk about symbolic representation. So the idea that me as a woman, if there are women in politics that I can see who have that job, that I think, oh, I can do this job too. This is a job for me. I belong here. So that symbolic aspect that we see ourselves, we see the role models, but also that we see that society is mirrored in our institutions, in our political institutions, in those decision-making bodies. That's really, really important. So a person, well, we'll get to this in one second, but there's arguments to be made that alone is reason why this is a problem and we need to fix it. The second thing that gets talked about a lot is something that's called substantive representation. And the idea behind this term is that people who are working in politics can make change, can affect change, can enact policies that affect and that benefit certain groups once they actually know about their issues and once they actually think about them. So a good example, does it matter if women can bring babies into the House of Commons or into the House of Assembly? Does it matter if a representative can breastfeed in the legislature? I argue yes. I've argued yes many times. And so what we see is these kinds of changes to the legislative body, to the way that the rules surrounding how the legislature actually works, tend to be enacted by individuals who care about that issue and seek to represent that issue on a policy basis. So you don't have to be a pregnant woman to advocate on behalf of bringing babies into a legislature. You can be a man, you can be a white man, you can be a black man, you can be anybody to substantively represent a particular group and their needs. But there's lots of evidence that shows that those individuals who come from different kinds of backgrounds bring in lots of different kinds of perspectives and voice those perspectives in the legislature. So if we don't have any women in the legislature, we may not know about the needs of women. We may not think about the needs of women. And it's definitely the case that one woman can't make the difference by herself. So we talk about this concept of critical mass. Now, I don't know if there's this particular threshold. This gets debated a lot in the literature, but the idea being that one person can't make a difference by themselves, although they ought to be there for symbolic reasons, but that if you get a group of women or a group of representatives from a diverse set of backgrounds, they can work together and they can effect change because they see that there are things that need to be done that others might not see. So if you have a legislature of these guys, okay, the kinds of policies they might think about, or the kinds of issues they might think about, or the kinds of ideas they might think are really important, or the kinds of laws they want to enact might vary quite differently from this group of individuals. Okay, and not even because the problems are different, although arguably the problems of these guys were quite different from the problems of today. But if we don't get the voices of a large group of individuals from a variety of backgrounds, we're going to be missing out on many opportunities to actually fix things, because we're going to miss out on new ideas, on different perspectives, and that's a really big loss. So I came across this quote, and I'm going to read it out to you, even though I talk fast and you can see it on your screen. So that's the seeing it on your screen to help you, because I talk really fast. So this is from Erin Tully. She's a professor at the University of Toronto who does a lot of work on candidates, racialized candidates in particular, and the kinds of different rules and the way institutions work and how that affects successive candidates, focusing mostly on Canada. So what she says is, diversity on council isn't a matter of political correctness, which we hear that a lot, don't we? It goes to the heart of representative democracy, which is premised on elected bodies reflecting the citizens they serve. So that goes back to that idea about symbolic representation, right? But those elected bodies reflect the citizens they serve in terms of substantive changes to policies as well. So elected bodies are unlikely to ever be a perfect microcosm of society, but the persistent homogeneity, so everybody being the same, of municipal councils is of concern. Councillors invariably draw upon their own experiences and beliefs when they exercise their duties, and plenty of evidence shows that decision-making tables are more effective when they include a broader range of perspectives. The exclusion of diverse voices from municipal councils may result in flawed policies. That's problematic, and that threatens the effectiveness and very legitimacy of the decisions that are taken. So you can find that, it's on the web. She wrote this paper a couple of years ago, and it's short. It's a short and sweet little policy document. It's beautiful. So that brings me to the end of the show. We could talk about this stuff forever. You're welcome to get in touch with me. My contact info is at the bottom of this slide here. But you can also ask questions now. I think Jennifer's going to come back in there and try to manage it, because clearly I can't use Zoom, so I'm going to need all the help I can get.
I am going to come in here now with the with our presentation. Just give me 1 second.
Awesome.
Perfect. Oh, well, here was your introductory slide that I missed. So just glad we hopped back to that one. Basically, yeah, so we can handle the Q&A now if we'd like. That was excellent. I'm so thrilled. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. I'm going to check and see if there's any questions, but I know I have definitely a few. Okay, so we have one in the chat here from Elizabeth Laurie saying, can you repeat the stat regarding female deputy mayors again?
Yeah, I'm bringing up my slide just for my own self. So deputy mayors, that's the only category in which there were more women than men. And there are just under, so it's about 60% to 40% of deputy mayors in the province who are women.
I had a question for you. I was wondering, in your opinion, you said that 1980 was the year of the women. I was wondering why, or if you wanted to offer something on that.
Yeah, this comes from the American context again. So a lot of the work that I've been doing on elections focuses on a lot of Canadian stuff, but also a lot of American stuff. And the literatures, this is where I get nerdy again, the literatures that talk about elections and voting are very American. They just have so many more races, so much more data collection. So a lot of the information we have comes from that context. So in 1980, things kind of changed and a whole bunch of women were elected. And so there just became this switch where we suddenly had a lot more women in politics, in Congress. And folks just call this the year of the woman because so many women were elected for the first time.
Okay, we've got a couple here. Kathy Hickman in the chat is asking, why do you think there are so many deputy mayors? Usually they are the most votes. Another reason, and you were doing an awesome job.
Thank you. You're getting a fruit basket too, apparently. I'm gonna run out of fruit baskets this year. Okay, so my theory is, well, I have a couple of theories and I have no data. So you're recording this, which makes me nervous. Usually when I'm in person, nobody records anything, and so I can say all kinds of random stuff and it doesn't come back to like cause trouble. So yeah, in many situations, they are the most votes. So whatever councillor got the most votes across all the different races, that person becomes deputy mayor. That's not always true. That's not true in St. John's, for example. It's not true everywhere, but that is the common thing. A lot of the research shows that women candidates, and actually, so I say women a lot, and a lot of my research focuses on women, but a lot of the data talk about the same kinds of dynamics that occur for racialized candidates. The women who are actually elected to politics, so there's all this data that says when women run, they win. But that is because the women who run are really, really, really good. So in order to actually run for politics in the first place, you need to be encouraged like 1,000 times. You need to be thinking that you actually could do it. And the women who actually think they can do it are remarkable. Versus, this is where I'm gonna get in trouble, any old average Joe guy thinks he can do it. Right? So the quality, we call the quality of candidates, because of their background, because of the ability they have to, you know, as oration and things like that, all of these things mean that women candidates tend to be of higher quality, and same is true for racialized candidates. So racialized candidates who run for politics, these people are highly educated. They have very strong social ties and social networks. These are really good candidates. So they have a really good chance of winning in the ridings that they run, which is why when they get run as sacrificial lambs, it's very troubling, because these people could have actually won had they run in a different riding. So my theory is two-pronged. Number one, the deputy mayor role, obviously it's not as important as the mayor role. Therefore, people think, oh, sure, a woman could do that. So there is some willingness to elect a woman for the deputy mayor role that might not exist for willingness to elect that same person to a mayor role. And, you know, I hate to talk about a particular politician in this way, but I can think back a couple of elections in St. John's ago when we had a woman running as mayor. And the main things you heard from people around town were, oh, she should wait her turn. She shouldn't be doing that. And I mean, that's highly sexist language, right? What do you mean wait your turn? What turn are we talking about? And why do others have to wait their turn? So these are problematic ideas in the first place. So whereas running for deputy mayor, not a problem, right? Did really well in that contest. So I think there's this sense that women ought not to reach for too high and ought to just do that secondary job. And they are very popular, right? So I think that's a part of that's going on there. So these individuals do really well because they are excellent. Therefore, they have the most votes. Therefore, they become deputy mayor if that's the way that system works. Or they're very popular and therefore people vote for them directly, even though they might not have voted for them for the position of mayor because that's not seen to be appropriate for them. I mean, again, these are shady theories, so I would need to do some more research on this before I said, but I think it has something to do with that.
Yeah, thank you for your opinion. We have a few more questions here. So we have one for Nicole Kiley. I wonder if the deputy mayor stat ratio changes when you consider paid versus volunteer councils.
Great point. Absolutely. So one of the things I think we can think about too a lot in the Newfoundland and Labrador context is that a lot of these positions are unpaid. And so I would expect, the data suggests that when a position is more competitive, when it is more lucrative, more men want that job. No men want these jobs, right? So the fact that there are still a lot of men in these jobs suggests that if these positions were paid, there would be way more men than there are right now. So I think that's a really great point, Nicole, absolutely.
Dr. Dolores Mullings in the chat is saying, I'm wondering if you are thinking that race does not matter when women run for politics. Do you think that the voting process is devoid of racism?
Oh, that's a great question. So no, excuse me, people are racist. We're all racist. We're socialized in a racist institution, a racist society. We're racist. I am racist. I do my best to like be aware of it and like work with my blinders, but I'm racist. So no, I do not think that voters are not racist. I think that they absolutely are. And I don't think that they're not sexist. I think that they absolutely are for the same reasons. We're living in a patriarchy. We're all sexist, even if we think that we're not. So what I do think, this goes back to that issue of quality, that the candidates who run, the racialized candidates who run for politics in winnable ridings, who are supported by their parties, these people are spectacular. They win. So, you know, despite the racism, despite all the things that are going on. So there's like a two-pronged process. We have to do a lot in society to fix these huge problems, but the institutions are part of the problem and create these problems. So, you know, if parties actually supported racialized candidates in winnable ridings, Bob's your uncle, suddenly there's the role model effect. There they are in politics because they can win. Suddenly others who are also excellent see, oh my goodness, I could do this too. This is where I belong. I could do this as well. And so I think that actually by creating institutional change, we would create societal change. I don't think it's going to work the other way around. Societal change is never going to drive enough change to have a real difference in politics.
Liam Swiss is asking, what do you think of the prospects for using equity measures, i.e. reserved seats or quotas, to help address gender or other inequalities in politics at federal, provincial, or even municipal levels in Canada?
Yeah, well, this works. So I support them. I think that they work. I think that Canadians don't have a problem with quotas. So for example, when there was a space that opened up recently on the Supreme Court of Canada, everybody said, oh, it's Newfoundland's turn. That is a quota. So we don't have a problem with regional quotas. We don't have an issue with setting aside seats for Atlantic Canada for the Senate or particular provinces and things like, we have no problem with quotas. What we have a problem with is particular kinds of quotas for particular kinds of groups that we perceive to be undeserving. And that usually happens to, you know, fit with sex, race, ethnicity, religion, I mean, you name it. So yeah, quotas, they work. I support them. I think that would be fantastic. And again, those kinds of institutional changes can then drive societal changes, because suddenly, because of quotas, we have women, we have racialized people working in legislatures, and therefore it becomes normal. It's a normal thing. It's no longer this like spectacular, unusual thing that we must talk about because it's a novelty. Suddenly media coverage of these candidates changes because their novelty wears off, right? So I think that that's a really important option, that a lot of folks have this knee-jerk reaction, oh no, I don't want quotas, what about merit? Well, who are all these meritorious men? Like, why are we not asking ourselves why we think that all of these men merit these positions? Are they really meritorious? Or do they really merit this? I love people that say exactly to my observations. You're getting a fruit basket as well, Liam. Thank you.
Okay, another one here. This is Jillian Pearson. I have a theory in political psychology that the willingness to vote for men with a less popular party or leader is much higher than for women. I'm wondering if there's any research on this. What are your thoughts?
I'm just reading this comment one more time to make sure I have it the right way. So we are willing to vote for an unpopular man leader more than an unpopular woman leader. Is that what you're saying, Jill? I'm going to say that that's what she's saying, because I don't like uncomfortable silences. No. I'm still reading her comments and I'm still more confused than before. So I don't know the answer to that. What I would say is that the data that I have seen that look at the importance of party leaders for parties suggests that, so for example, personality matters, the characteristics of these different leaders matters, and has an impact on vote choice. And this is especially true for leaders of major parties. So parties that actually have a chance of winning, leaders matter more. Leaders matter less for parties that have no chance of winning at all, because people are just partisans. They're just voting for the party because they support that party, because the Rhino party is not going to win. So you're only voting for that party because you love them. Or, you know, another example right now, at least, is the Green Party, right? You're a partisan. Elizabeth May, excellent parliamentarian, really good at her job. Everybody has slip-ups here and there, but pretty popular. Not the most popular leader in Canadian history though, right? But folks that elect, you know, folks that vote for the Green Party are doing it not so much because of the leader, although she doesn't detract from the party, but because they are Green Party supporters. And yeah, so I would say the same thing is probably true for gender, for sex, that for parties where the party has a really good chance of winning, the leader matters more. And then these kinds of stereotypes about leaders, stereotypes about sex, how women ought to be. And the problem is a lot of these stereotypes, they don't mash, or they don't mesh well. So our stereotypes that we have about what a proper political leader should look like, if you close your eyes and think about it for a second, it's usually a white man, because that's what we've seen for most of our lives. And so, you know, and then you add in stereotypes about gender and stereotypes about race. So you have, you know, ideas about women. They're soft, they're open to talking, they're very like emotional, they're very in tune with others' needs. That's not the way we think about a leader. We think about a leader who's decisive, who is competent, who is very strong. And so those stereotypes clash, which is often at a disadvantage to women, because women who aren't those things, because they are soft, because they are emotionally in tune to others and so on, they're seen to be weak. And then there's the women who are those things, who fit the bill of a stereotypical leader, but then they're not really women, are they? And so we get into that problem. I feel like I've gone on a tangent, I'm sorry.
Don't be sorry. Thank you for your opinion. You're very popular. We have a few more questions. So Aisha says, thank you for this great presentation. The statistics you've shared suggest that when women run, they win. Do you have any research to share about who women vote for in Canada and in Newfoundland? When they vote, do they tend to vote more for women candidates than for men candidates?
Honestly, we're all partisans. So if parties run women in winnable ridings, we'll vote for the women because we're voting for the Liberal Party, or we're voting for the Conservative Party, or we're voting for the NDP. The challenge comes to pass when women run or racialized candidates run in unwinnable ridings. These individuals could have run somewhere else, could have won somewhere else, but they're up against, you know, a riding that has always been liberal or always been conservative, and therefore the ability to break through is very challenging. So I would say that Newfoundlanders and Labradorians are partisans like everywhere else in Canada, and that's the #1 thing that determines whether or not you're going to vote for a particular candidate. It's not so much the leader, although again, leader does matter. It's not so much the candidate, although we like to say that it is really the party label. So if a party backs a candidate and provides them with funding, with support, with, you know, the ability to fundraise, with the ability to manage a team of volunteers, with all kinds of stuff like that, with that kind of professional support, then that individual has a really good chance of winning, especially if it's a winnable riding. If it's not, then, I mean, none of us can win a winnable riding or a non-winnable riding.
Sanchita asked, do we have any data on the number of racialized women in politics in Newfoundland? Do you see any challenges racialized women face to join politics in Newfoundland and Labrador, I should say, sorry, Newfoundland, Labrador.
So this is, I mean, that's a great question. I would be interested in knowing, I don't have these data. So I would be interested in seeing data on the number of racialized women in this province who would consider running for politics. I mean, it's a very small place, right? And there's a real, I want to say this, I'm a CFA, so I'm going to say this. There's a real insider-outsider thing that goes on here, right? I'm a white lady. I'm pretty privileged. I'm a university prof. I have a good income. I'm a CFA. I wouldn't run for politics. I don't think I'd win. Not because I'm not spectacular, because obviously I am. Supposedly I'm a rock star. But no, I don't think I would win. And partly that's name recognition. So like even right now, if I go and I meet somebody, they're like, Bittner. Oh, that's not a Newfoundland name, is it? Where are you from, my dear? And so then I got to answer that question. I'm a white lady. I grew up in Toronto. I was never asked that question in Toronto, not once in my entire life. And so I think that racialized candidates, racialized women, or racialized men have this, that's an automatic barrier at the door, knocking on the door. You've got to justify why it is that you want to run for politics, why it is that you're the right person, why it's not, you know, Betty from down the road or whatever instead. So I think that that is going to be a barrier here. And again, I know this is a troublesome thing to say. That's a barrier here that may not exist in Toronto. And so there's research on how candidates do when they have the support of parties in districts where there is a higher percentage of racialized like voters, because this place is so white. All ridings in Newfoundland are so white, some more so than others. We don't have a district where there's a majority of racialized citizens. Like that's not a thing that we have here, right? So trying to even convince immigrants, refugees, racialized people that have been born here and raised here that they should run for politics, I think is going to be pretty challenging. But oh, wouldn't we benefit as a province from those voices? So I think that that's, you know, so are there data? I don't think so, because honestly, I cannot think of a single person, I lived here since 2006, who ran for municipal politics, who was a racialized woman, #1. And then at the provincial level, I'm trying to think here, I'm gonna slip it up, but I can't really think of a racialized woman who's run for politics in my experience here. But yeah, I mean, I would love that. Sanchita, would you run? That'd be great. I would support that.
Okay, we have another question here. Where'd it go? So Emma Martin is asking, why do you think that women in the 18 to 25 age category run as candidates less than all other age groups? And do you think that their participation in politics is lower as well?
Yes. So everybody in that youth category participates less in politics. They vote less. They do stuff less. They might do other kinds of political things more, like, I don't know, green drinks or things like this. So I think that, so it's really interesting and also really heartbreaking to look at data about girls' attitudes in particular. So the data suggests that there's like a real life cycle effect that happens, but that it never kind of returns. So young girls who are between the ages of 8 and like 11, 12, 13, these girls think they can run the world. And, you know, most of them, they're natural leaders, right? They're pretty bossy. They can run the world. And then something happens once they turn 14 and they no longer think this. And so the participation or the ideas that you might be able to participate in politics at age 14 amongst girls goes way down, like it just tanks. And it's heartbreaking. And I can think back to being 14, and I was a nerd then too, let's face it. And just the level of self-doubt and the lack of role models means that you do not see yourself in politics because you don't think that you belong there. And so girls who are 18, they're women, but they're still girls in many ways. And that legacy of feeling bad about yourself, that continues for a very long time. So I would say that that's a big part of what's happening in that youngest age group, the 18 to 25, because those women, they're in university or they're, working or they're, traveling the world if they're lucky and things like that. They're not thinking about politics. And if they are, they're thinking about it from a very different perspective. But the lack of role models is a real problem for, I think, women in that age category for sure.
I missed another question from Emma actually up above. So Emma actually before that said, thank you, Dr. Bittner for the talk. So she also asked, could you speak to the gendered language used in politics and indeed in political science?
I mean, yeah, I could talk about that for hours. I'm not sure exactly what you mean. So do you mean like in the media? Do you mean just like in our literature? I'm going to ask Emma to maybe follow up with me by email. And I'd be happy to chat about that more. I mean, this is like, yeah, I have many favorite topics.
Yeah, there's a few other questions, so maybe Emma can clarify and I'll come back to that. So Andrew Powers asking, do you think it's less or more winnable if it's partisan riding and the party is favored? Can a CFA win?
I mean, in a winnable riding, if a party backs the candidate, that's the biggest ticket to winning, right? So in theory, any candidate should have the highest chance of winning for the party in a winnable riding. And the winnable riding is defined by which party might win, right? So an independent candidate almost never wins. I mean, obviously there are exceptions, but yeah, so I think that a CFA or a racialized candidate or an immigrant or a woman or a non-traditional gender identification or things like this, these are all likelier to win with party support. And not just fake party support like, oh, here's a sign for your lawn, like real party support, resources, money, campaign team. These are all things that, can help, but only if the riding is winnable.
Emma did follow up. So they offered that in literature and data, female, male versus women, men, and the exclusion of other categories of gender.
Yes, I love this topic. But I'm a little worried that I might get carried away. So I would say that, times change and society changes and the way we talk about people and groups changes as well. So the problem with the categories of female and male is that it's heavily biologically based. And there are lots of women, for example, who identify as women that don't have the woman parts. And so I don't want to define a person by what's under their diaper. I'd prefer to define them by how they define themselves. So that's the kind of women and man thing. So that's one category. The second thing I would say is that thinking about gender versus thinking about sex, because gender can be much more fluid than just two categories, diaper or no diaper. And so I think that when we're talking about the impact of gender on attitudes, on participation, on the way we think about politics or society or things like that, we can't just use that binary sex category of woman versus man. At the same time, I think it's also still really important that we acknowledge that the institutional setup and that society really does discriminate against categories of people, women, for example, or Black women, for example. So while I don't want to, stay focused too heavily on categories when we're talking about, because absolutely there are, multiple genders and it can be defined in lots of different ways, and lots of people don't fit these boxes, but the boxes still matter to a lot of people, and the way that we interact with others, because of kind of the psychology and the brain and stuff, is still heavily in these boxes. So you kind of got to do like two things at once. So always trying to fix the bad language, the kind of bad categories, while at the same time understanding that these categories do have meaning for a lot of people, and groups of people are affected by the institutional structures and the systemic racism and sexism that goes on. I don't know if that makes sense.
This one came in, I think, when we were having the conversation about racialized women running in politics. So Sandy Wolfrey Fahy asked what would help them / us to take that leap. So I think if I could be incorrect, but I think what they were asking is what would help them take the leap into entering or running for municipal politics or beyond. What can we do to help?
Well, as like individuals, what we can do to help is we can try to encourage our friends to run. So if you know somebody who would be great in politics, tell them more than once, because they usually need to be told more than once and by multiple sources. But ultimately, I think the thing that we all do, so I'm going to go down this road of trying to make a comparison, or not a metaphor so much, but this is where my students often like start to, get confused, but I need to do this. So for example, we talk all the time right now about self-care, about the importance of taking care of ourselves, which includes, yoga and going to get a pedicure and having a cup of tea or whatever. These are individual solutions to the need to fix a problem. The problem is not individual. The problem is societal. So we're trying to find, the individual solution to a societal or systemic problem, which is that we are all working far too hard. Technology is out of control. It's running our lives. We need boundaries. We need to have some proper work-life balance. That's a systemic thing. That's not an individual thing. So me going for a run every day is good for me, yes, but that is not the solution to the fact that I need more support in my job or whatever. And I'm not saying that I do, if anybody at one is listening to me right now. So similarly, we can on an individual level encourage people to run for politics, but actually the solution is not individuals trying to fix this themselves. The solution is not society. The solution is institutions. And so parties have to do something about this. They all say they care about representation, and they all say they care about diversity, but put your money where your mouth is. Actually try to recruit some people. Don't just say we have a mantle because we couldn't find any women. That we all know is bullshit, and do the work. And so if parties do this work, we don't need quotas, formal quotas, for example, Liam, if parties actually just take that on and do the work. They don't, right? So the onus is on parties, the onus is on the institutions, the onus is not on you as an individual to step up or lean in or to fix the problem yourself or to be encouraged by your best friend all the time. So we should encourage people to run for politics, certainly, but that's not the solution to this problem. The problem is much, much bigger.
Great answer. Christina's wondering, do you think that if people involved in politics got into schools to discuss or educate about politics, more girls would be interested, thinking along the lines of the efforts for getting women in STEM?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is true of engagement into politics for everybody. So youth engagement is very low. Part of that is because of the fact that we have no training in schools. We don't know how politics works. We're not taught about how politics works. We're not taught that we should care about it, we should think about it, or anything. So I think that bringing politics into the schools would be of benefit to everybody. And then I think the role model effect really matters, right? So the kind of the daughters of the vote, the kind of campaign school ideas, the training things that happen at a young age that encourage people to look around them to see others doing cool stuff, and having women in those positions, or having representatives who are not just white and not just men in those positions can make a really big difference, because you as a little girl see others. And I remember, I'm not going to tell my age, but I was young when Kim Campbell became the first female prime minister, and it was very motivating for me. And I was like, that is cool. So the more we have, and yeah, I'm nerdy, but still, the more we have that, the more that we're going to have others see that as being a possibility for them. So I believe that there are a lot of women who are women now, who were girls then, who were motivated by Kim Campbell, whatever you want to think about her party or her level of success or how that party didn't do well in that election or whatever, it's irrelevant. That was motivating for a lot of people. And I'm certain that people thought about politics as an option after she, took that role on compared to before that.
Christina, the same one who posed this question, said, my grade 6 teacher made a fun activity out of the election happening that year. We had to get in groups, create parties, etc. Learned a lot. It really stuck. Totally.
One of the things my mom did, so when I was in grade 7, I had a teacher who just loved, I was living in Toronto. She loved Jack Layton. He was a city councilor at the time. She just loved him. And she talked about Jack Layton every single day in class, which I don't think teachers are really supposed to do, but okay. Anyway, so I went home and I was like super into politics and I was like, Mom, have you heard of Jack Layton? And she's like, no, because my mom is not political. Anyway, so she said, okay, listen, we'll make a deal. You got to do more research because you can't just talk about Jack Layton all the time, because I was 12, like what did I know? So she said, if you do the research and you figure out what you think about these issues, we'll go vote. I will vote however you tell me. I'll give you my vote. And so this was very empowering for a young girl who was age 12. I actually went and did the research. Now, granted, again, I'm nerdy, but still, I went and did the research. I thought about it. I have actually no idea who I told her to vote for in the end, but I knew that she did it. And she did it then in the provincial election. She did it then in the federal election. And then the first time that I was allowed to vote, because I was old enough, I did it myself. But up until then, I had still had a vote because she kind of gave hers to me. So there's ways to get your kids into politics, even on a family level, because, the kids of political families usually end up being quite political themselves. But certainly, again, that's an individual solution to a systemic problem. So the issue is the schools, the issue is parties, the issue is society, the issue is not us as individuals and what can we do on a one-on-one basis.
That's very cool, actually. That's awesome. Nicole Kiley's wondering, is there data our province, cities, countries should be collecting that could shed more light on the issues or keep us more accountable?
So one of the things I would love to see is if the province made data available freely on the web. So that would be one big, we already collect data. What we don't do is share it. And we don't share it publicly. So that would be one thing that I think that, again, governments could do to help researchers do some research and things like that. I mean, the provincial data, the municipal data that I showed you earlier, this came from my students collecting it painstakingly across the province, and they got support and they got help from MNL and they got help from oh shoot, I'm going to say this wrong, the government ministry that does the city stuff, the municipal planning and things like that. So they got data from them as well, but there's not a lot of data that's kept. So we have data from 2009 to the present, but the data collection before that is so poor and it's not maintained. And so it's really hard to go back in time. And so what would be great is if we tried to kind of maintain data a little bit better. So we're collecting it, we have it. So when election returns come in, let's actually put it on the web so everybody can see this. That would be great. And I think that that's true even at the municipal level in St. John's. There's a lot of stuff like information about campaign contributions that needs to go up on the web. Everybody should know who contributed to whose campaign. This stuff is all like, it's like a no-brainer. Municipal affairs, thank you, Andrea Power. So the data exists. What doesn't exist is a kind of archiving and documentation and taking it seriously for citizens. So openness, transparency, availability of data, that would be a major change.
Yeah, Nicole agrees and said, I love the idea of an online portal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Kathy Hickman, I think Kathy, yep, wrote, please do call out to listeners to encourage younger females to be courageous, confident, and assertive in their diversity.
I mean, I agree with Kathy, and at the same time, totally. This is the individual solution to a systemic problem, right? We're asking people to lean in, people who already lean in a lot. So the same people who are, doing diversity talks are the same people who do the talks all the time, right? So they're oversubscribed, or they're over dedicated, or they're being called upon too much. And so I think the answer really is that if we make the system more friendly to everybody, and not just encourage, but like actually change the way politics operates, we won't need to be courageous and rope our friends into things. We'll just see more people there because parties have made the effort to recruit, to fund, to support. That's where the money's at.
Yeah, totally agree. I think, I mean, I would say that in the interim, we still need to be encouraging and celebrating. You know, I don't think
Absolutely.
that change is going to happen overnight. I
Yeah.
do think it's very important to make sure that we're still rah-rahing for the young girls, the young, you know, gender diverse folks, and racialized folks, everybody. I think that that's still important.
And I think too, the message has to be that the more voices we have in these positions, the more ideas there are. So, you know, you a lot of the time people who run for politics, despite what we all think about politicians, and there are all kinds of data that show that we think of them as like used car salesmen, things like this. But putting that aside, most politicians run for politics because they have ideas. They want to do stuff. They want to fix things. These are good. And so it is the case that the more people that we have who come from different backgrounds with these ideas, with these things that they want to fix, this is good. And it means that we're going to have solutions that are better. So trying to encourage people by suggesting, listen, you don't have to know everything. Openness to learning, openness to changing your mind, openness to listening to different voices and to thinking about different possible solutions to really, you know, intractable problems. I mean, look at Muskrat Falls. What is the solution to that? I don't know. I'm grateful that I don't have to figure it out. But hearing from different voices is certainly going to make that problem easier to fix than trying to go the same old route as we always have, which led us down this road in the first place, right? So I think that the more, so when you can encourage people, I guess I'm saying, and if they say, oh, I can't do that job, that's, I'm not good enough, or I'm not competent, or I don't know enough about, I don't know, taxes. Nobody knows about taxes. You just say, look, you don't have to know everything. Just go and learn. You're smart. You can learn. You know how to read. Go do it. I mean, the bar is not that high. And not because the job is not important. The bar is not that high because the folks that don't need encouragement run, and the folks that do need encouragement don't. Despite the fact that there are plenty of really excellent politicians in our province right now who are doing really, really good work. And it's a hard job. Not just, you know, the kind of the bullying that goes on, the terribleness inside of the house and things like that, but, you know, it's a very demanding job. You're 24/7, you're on demand. People have your cell phone number. They call you in the middle of the night and they expect you to do stuff for them. I would not enjoy that. So it's a really hard job. And if we tell people that, you know, they're engaging in a conversation, they're trying to further research, maybe that will be more appealing to some people. But we do need those voices and we do need those perspectives.
Sorry, give me 1 second. I'm gonna come back to that. See something else in the chat here. Oh, Kathy said, awesome, Ben. Thank you. Have to leave. Forgive me. So I think that's the perfect spot to end there. So I want to thank you because there's no more questions coming in. So I think that given that conversation we just had about encouraging folks to run, I want to talk about our next event. So next week on Wednesday, we have two presenters, Jelana Lewis and Caitlin Urquhart, who are going to share best practices in running for municipal elections, because we've talked a lot about why it matters and why, you know, like what does representation even mean? But the second event that we're going to be offering next week is how you can get involved. So how you can build your own platform, or how you can collaborate, and how you can, you know, garner support, how you can find your community. So I think that's going to be a really excellent session, and I want to invite you all to participate. Again, it's free next Wednesday night, same time, same place. So check us out on Facebook. And Amanda, I want to thank you so much for your time. And I want to just check this, see if there's any questions. No, just a bunch of thank yous and kudos, and you are wonderful. So thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you to everybody for coming.
Thank you. Such a pleasure.